Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today we have Lainey Harris presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Lainey will review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have comments, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during the Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and Legal Aid is not representing you at this time. Lainey will go over this in more detail, but please remember to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will not take any more questions after 4:20, and we'll have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lainey to get us started.
Thanks, Marissa. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to talk today about SNAP benefits. Specifically, we've got 4 topics that we're going to cover about SNAP benefits. The first are applying, then making sure that you maximize your benefits, how to recertify, and then knowing your rights. So first, what even is SNAP? SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's also commonly known as the Food and Nutrition Services, FNS benefits, or by its old name of food stamps. And this is a program that provides low-income households with money each month to help them purchase food. This money is placed on a reusable EBT card, and it can only be used to purchase eligible food items. Applying for SNAP. There are several ways that you can apply, and you can choose whatever works best for you. You can apply in person at your local county DSS office. You can apply by completing a paper application and either faxing or mailing it to your local DSS office, or you can apply online through the ePass system. If you want to file in person, you have the right to file an application on the same day that you visit DSS during office hours. Each county has at least one DSS office. After you submit the application, you'll be interviewed by a caseworker, and you may need to provide additional documentation to support your application. If you would like more information on how to apply, you can visit this website with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services that gives really great instructions on how to apply. It also has paper copies of the form that are available in English as well as Spanish. There are some basic eligibility rules that you need to meet in order to be eligible. Generally, you must have first an eligible immigration status or be a citizen, be a North Carolina resident at the time you apply, and meet certain income rules. I will also flag that for some people, not everyone, but for some people, there are also work requirements. These work requirements were waived during the public health emergency, but they have now started again and they are currently in effect. We'll talk more about the work requirements a little bit later in the presentation. So to zoom in just a little bit on immigrant eligibility, there's different statuses that can still make someone eligible for SNAP benefits. The broadest, of course, is U.S. citizens. They're always going to be meet the eligibility requirements as far as immigration. But lawful permanent residents or people who have green cards, they are also eligible. They generally, though, have to wait 5 years after they lawfully entered the U.S. to be eligible for SNAP benefits. So for lawful permanent residents, for many of them, there is a 5-year waiting period before they're eligible. People who are refugees, asylees, or Afghan special immigrants and parolees, they are eligible for SNAP benefits, and they don't have to wait 5 years to be eligible. Just for clarification too, on asylees, this only applies to folks who have been legally granted asylum status. It doesn't apply for people who are still in the process of trying to attain asylum. These are not the only immigration statuses that make someone eligible for SNAP benefits. These are just some of the ones that we commonly see. So someone can still apply even if they have a different status. They may be eligible. It never hurts to apply. Not everyone in the household has to have an eligible immigration status. You can apply just for members of the household who do have an eligible immigration status. So for example, if their family has a child who has an eligible immigration status, but the parent does not, the parent can apply on behalf of the child and receive SNAP benefits for the child, even though the parent themselves is not eligible. DSS cannot require you to provide a social security number for household members who are not applying for SNAP benefits. This chart shows the income rules. As you can tell, it depends on the household size. Most households are what's called categorically eligible. This means that they have monthly income that's below 200% of the federal poverty level, and they have no household members who have been previously disqualified from SNAP benefits. So this could have been because of fraud or a felony drug conviction. But if no one in the household has been disqualified and they're below 200% of the federal poverty level, they're categorically eligible. And this is a big deal because categorically eligible households don't have to meet an asset test or an asset limit. So you don't have to provide information about vehicles or money in a bank account. You just have to provide information about the monthly income that's coming in each month. There is a felony controlled substance ban. People who have committed a felony that involves the possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance are permanently disqualified from SNAP benefits. And that's a felony in any state that involves controlled substances. However, though, there is an exception for people who were convicted specifically of Class H or Class I drug felonies. Those people can reestablish eligibility for SNAP benefits and become eligible again if they meet a minimum disqualification period of 6 months after their release, if they were incarcerated, or after their probation period ends. And they also have to be referred to their local area mental health authority for an assessment. So if they've met that disqualification period and they've complied with the referral, they can regain eligibility for SNAP benefits. So like I said, for some folks, there are work requirements for SNAP benefits. These work requirements only apply to people who are able-bodied adults without dependents. Those folks must work 20 hours a month, an average of about 20 hours a week, or be participating in a work program for 80 hours a month. This work can be a combination of things. It can be employment for wages, it can be self-employment, volunteer work, work in exchange for goods or services, or a combination of these. So if someone, maybe they work a job for wages, like they work in a restaurant or they're a cashier for 10 hours a week, and then they also drive for a ride-sharing app for 10 hours a week through self-employment, those 10 hours together add up to 20, and so they meet the work requirements. I've also seen a lot of people who babysit, and they qualify as long as they're babysitting 20 hours a week. It doesn't matter how much money they're actually making doing that babysitting work, as long as it meets the hourly requirement. There is a good cause exception too for people who would have worked 80 hours a month, but they missed some work for a good cause. They're still considered to have met the work requirements if their absence from work was just a temporary thing and they kept their job. So for example, if someone was sick, if they had a household emergency or their car broke down and they missed a little bit of work, but they kept their job and they're going back to work, that can be a good cause exception that won't prevent someone from getting SNAP benefits. If you don't meet these work requirements or an exemption, which we'll talk about next, you can only get SNAP benefits for any 3 months in a 36-month period. So basically, you're limited to only 3 months if you aren't working or meeting an exception. So these are the exceptions for the work requirements. The first is just based on age. So people who are under 18 years old or at least 55 years old, they don't have to meet the work requirements. If someone is within a SNAP household that contains another member under age 18, they don't have to meet the work requirements. And that minor makes everyone in the household exempt. So for example, if there's a family with Two parents and two children. One of the children is 19, one of the children is 16. The 16-year-old, because they're under 18, makes everyone in the household exempt, including their sibling. So you don't have to have control over the child or be responsible for the child. As long as that child is within the SNAP household and they're under age 18, everyone in the SNAP household is exempt. If you are pregnant or homeless, you are also exempt. Veterans, regardless of the conditions of their discharge, are exempt. So it doesn't matter what kind of discharge the person has, as long as they are a veteran, they're exempt. If you're between the ages of 18 and 24 and you were in foster care when you turned 18, you can be eligible for SNAP benefits up through age 24, even if you're not working. And then the last category is for people considered unfit for employment. And this can be from a lot of different things. So if you're receiving workers' compensation, disability benefits, or a certain type of Medicaid that's based on disability, you'll be considered exempt from the work requirements. If you don't meet any of those, but you've been medically certified as unfit for employment, that is also an exemption. Usually this looks like a form that someone will have their doctor or their nurse practitioner fill out saying that they don't think the person is medically able to work 20 hours a week, either due to physical conditions, mental conditions, or a combination of those. If you're unable to work due to alcohol or drug addiction, you're also exempt. If you are at least a half-time student in either high school or college, you don't have to meet these specific work requirements. However, though, there are also some other additional requirements for college students, so just keep that in mind. And then the last is a catch-all category for anyone who is considered obviously unfit for work based on the worker's observation or judgment. So it's really important to report work activity or exemptions if you're an able-bodied adult without dependents. I always encourage people not to assume that DSS already has the correct and updated information for you. Most people recertify every 6 months, and a lot can change in 6 months. So make sure to keep DSS aware of changes in your address, changes in your phone number, changes in your work. If you are now living with a minor child and you weren't before, that may make you exempt from the work requirements. Same thing if you're pursuing or receiving a disability or unemployment benefits, or if you're now pregnant. Maximizing your SNAP benefits. So your County Department of Social Services, or DSS, determines your monthly SNAP benefit based on your monthly income, your household size, and certain expenses that they consider. Generally, a household is all the people who live together and buy or cook food together. There are some exceptions, though, of people who have to be considered in a household, even if they don't buy or cook food together. So definitely that's something to talk about with DSS when you're applying or recertifying, is making sure they know who all lives in the home and who all eats and cooks food together. As a general rule, higher monthly income means the household is going to receive less SNAP benefits, but certain higher monthly expenses can help the household get more SNAP benefits. So you can see this chart here, as household size increases, so does the maximum benefit. This is, though, just the maximum benefit. It's not the amount that everyone gets. Each household gets a different allotment amount depending on their particular circumstances. So expense verifications are very important in the SNAP application process. There are two different kinds. Required verifications absolutely have to be provided. If you do not provide the required verifications, DSS can refuse to process your application. Recommended verifications are just optional and you don't have to provide them, but they're often used to determine your benefit levels, and it is generally in your best interest to provide the recommended verifications. This can make sure that you get all the benefits that you're entitled to. So some examples of required verifications that, remember, have to be provided if requested are proof of identity, proof of citizenship or immigration status, household size or composition, Social Security number if requested, but again, only for those who are actually applying for SNAP benefits, and then proof of income that has to be reported as well. Some recommended verifications are expenses. DSS only considers certain expenses. They don't consider every kind of expense, but expenses that they do consider include utility expenses, mortgage or rental payments, property taxes and insurance, medical expenses for people who are seniors or people with disabilities, child support payments that someone in the SNAP household pays for a child who is not in that household, and then childcare expenses is another recommended verification. The childcare expense category is pretty broad. It has to be some sort of childcare expense that you have because of work, but that can be daycare, it can be an after-school program, a summer camp program, or even babysitting if someone babysits a child in order for you to be able to go to work. On to talking about recertifying for SNAP benefits. So like I said, most SNAP households have to recertify every 6 months. The SNAP recertification process is a lot like the SNAP application process. You have to fill out a form that asks for information about your income, expenses, and who all lives in the household. And then you have to provide, again, proof of income or proof of any other for those required verifications. And you need to once again provide those recommended expense verifications to get your maximum benefits. DSS will mail the form out to the household around the end of the beginning of the last month of their certification period, and it must be returned to DSS by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. It's a good idea to try to submit all the verifications at that same time together with your recertification form. You don't have to, but if you don't, DSS will probably reach out to you and ask you to provide those things later. So it's better to submit them all together if you can. You can recertify late if you don't make that 15th day deadline, but you may have a potential lapse in your benefits. So the absolute last day that you can recertify is the end of the month after it was due. So for example, we'll say that a household is certified for SNAP benefits for 6 months from January 1st to June 30th. In early June, if not even late May, the household would receive the recertification form from DSS, which is another reminder of why it's important to make sure you keep your address updated with DSS. In order for it to be timely received by June 15th. And that's in the possession of DSS. So if you mail it on the 15th, it's probably going to be untimely or late. It needs to be in DSS's possession by the 15th. That gives DSS until the end of the month to process the recertification and keep your benefits going on into the next month. There are only a few changes that have to be reported during your 6-month certification period. All other changes can wait until you recertify. The first is if an able-bodied adult without dependents in the household stops working an average of 80 hours a month. That has to be reported. If anyone in the SNAP household receives lottery or gambling winnings of $4,250 or more, that needs to be immediately reported. The household's income goes over 130% of the federal poverty level. Usually DSS sends a form out when they tell you that you've been approved or recertified, and that form has a chart that tells you what 130% of the federal poverty level is for your household size. You don't have to report an increase in your expenses or a decrease in your income, but reporting these changes may increase your SNAP benefits, and so it's often in your best interest to report this and provide proof of it and ask for your SNAP benefits to be recalculated instead of just waiting until your certification period ends. About SNAP appeals and your rights in a SNAP appeals process. So most importantly, you have appeal rights. If you disagree with an action that's taken by DSS that impacts your SNAP benefits, you probably have appeal rights. And when I say appeal, I just mean request a hearing. You should read the written notice from DSS carefully. They have to send you a written notice when they're taking some sort of action in your case. And the notice should explain your appeal rights and the deadline for you to appeal. That deadline is usually pretty strict, and so you want to make sure that you make your deadline. There are two main types of SNAP hearings. The first are state fair hearings, which generally cover issues about eligibility for SNAP benefits, SNAP benefit amounts, and then SNAP overpayments. The second kind are administrative disqualification hearings, and these are just used for issues involving intentional program violations, IPVs, also sometimes known as fraud cases. So for the state fair hearings, an opportunity for a hearing must be provided to any household that's negatively impacted by a DSS action that affects their involvement in SNAP. To appeal, you just need to make a clear statement, either oral or written, to DSS that you want to present your case to a higher authority. I usually recommend that the statement be written just so that you have proof that it was submitted, but it doesn't have to be. It can be made verbally or even over the phone. Generally, a request for a fair hearing must be made within 90 calendar days of the date on the DSS notice. However, though, DSS must continue SNAP benefits at the prior level if the hearing request is made within 10 days. The hearing is conducted by a state hearing officer with North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So the hearing is not decided by someone else who works at DSS. It's decided by someone who works actually for the state instead of your local county. Administrative disqualification hearings, though, are different. They are only used when DSS believes that it has clear and convincing evidence that an individual has committed some act of intentional program violation, which is generally fraud. An intentional program violation happens when a SNAP household member knowingly, willfully, and with deceitful intent commits a fraudulent act involving SNAP benefits. This can include things such as making false statements or hiding information on a SNAP application or recertification to get SNAP benefits that they're not entitled to, misusing their EBT card, including selling or trading SNAP benefits, or using SNAP benefits to buy food for or share food with someone who's not in the SNAP household. If DSS believes the household has committed an intentional program violation, they'll send the household a written notice that they're being accused of this. The notice will include a date for their local disqualification hearing, because you do have a right to a hearing. DSS often includes a waiver form with this notice that says you can agree to just waive the hearing and accept the consequences. Importantly, though, you don't have to sign this waiver. You can, but you don't have to, and it's legally binding once you sign it. So you want to make sure that you understand what you're signing and understand what you're agreeing to before you sign and submit that waiver. The hearing officer for local disqualification hearings is someone at DSS who has not been previously involved in your case. The hearing officer has to provide the SNAP household with a copy of the decision after the hearing. It often comes by certified mail that you have to sign for. The SNAP household then has 15 days from the date of the decision to appeal if they disagree with the decision. After the appeal, the household then has a brand new hearing that is a state level disqualification hearing with a hearing officer from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So what happened at the first hearing doesn't really matter. It's a brand new hearing. The county has to present their evidence all over again, and the household has the opportunity to present their evidence or to question or argue against the county's evidence at the state level. There are some pretty serious consequences to intentional program violations. If it's the person's first first IPV, they're disqualified for 12 months. So that means that they cannot receive SNAP benefits for 12 months. If it is their second intentional program violation, it's a 24-month disqualification. And if it's their third program violation, they receive a permanent SNAP disqualification. And when it says permanent, it really is permanent. It is for the rest of your life across all states. You cannot receive SNAP benefits. If you misrepresent your residence and or your identity to get multiple benefits across multiple states, you can receive a 10-year disqualification. The disqualification only applies, though, to the person who actually committed the intentional program violation. It doesn't apply to everyone in the household. So if there's a parent and children who are receiving SNAP benefits, if the parent is found to have committed an intentional program violation, even if the parent is disqualified for 12 months, the children can still receive SNAP benefits, and the parent can receive those benefits on the EBT card for the children, but they're going to receive less than they would if the parent was also still in the household. In addition to these disqualifications, all adult members of the SNAP household can be jointly responsible for paying back the SNAP benefits that the household should not have received. So this can be a pretty serious overpayment that people should be aware of, that they're risking this if they commit an intentional program violation. So a household does have pretty significant rights during the hearing process. Before the hearing, the household or its representatives can review the case file and records that DSS plans to use at the hearing. The household can choose to represent themselves, get legal counsel, or have another person represent them. The household can bring their own witnesses and submit any evidence, such as maybe records, receipts, or other statements that they believe will help explain their case. The household can question or challenge any testimony or evidence presented by DSS, and the household can also request a postponement or a continuance of up to 30 days if they need more time to prepare for the hearing or try to get legal counsel. And now I'm happy to take questions if anyone has anything. Like Marissa said, I am an attorney, but I'm not your attorney, and so I can't give you specific advice on any kind of specific legal matters, but I can just give general information or clarification on things we've talked about today. We also have here the information on how to reach legal aid. So we have our toll-free helpline where you can call and apply for our assistance. We also have an online application process, and we have a dedicated senior helpline for people 60 and older that they can choose to call to also try to apply for our help. So again, I'm happy to take questions if anybody has anything.
Perfect. We do have a couple questions in the chat. And again, if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. First question, under the verification information needed for income, would a W-2 or a pay stub be needed?
Question. Depends on what kind of income it is. Generally, if it's wages, DSS just needs proof of income for the past 30 days. So pay stubs for the past 30 days would be sufficient. If it's self-employment, that can be a little trickier because there's income and then expenses that have to be factored in. So for self-employment, they often want something like a W-2 that gives more extensive information. It just depends on the particular situation.
Perfect. And if someone does the recommended verifications in addition to the required verifications, would you say they have a greater chance of getting more SNAP benefits?
Yes, because DSS, when they have a calculator that they use to determine the household's monthly amount, and they put the household's income in, and they put in the expenses as well. So if you don't submit the verifications, those recommended verifications that prove your expenses, you don't get credit for them. So even if you put on your application that you pay $1,000 in rent and you pay $500 in childcare, you don't get credit for it unless you provide the verification to prove that you actually do pay those things. And so you need to submit those in order for them to count and put it into the calculator to determine the household's allotment amount.
Perfect. Gonna give it just a second here to see if any other questions come in. All right. Oh, wait. Would something like child support payments need to be included in income? In income.
Yes, so you need to report any kind of income that the household receives from any source. So that can include child support. It can include benefits like disability benefits, other government benefits. They need to be reported. Sometimes DSS has access to that information through their system, and they may be able to look up the child support for you and get the monthly amounts. But you absolutely do have a duty to report the income and at least tell them about it. You may need to provide proof of it if it's something that DSS can't get on their own.
Okay. As I am not seeing any other questions on either Zoom or Facebook, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you so much to everyone for joining us, with a special thanks to Lainey for presenting and for answering those questions. If you would like to review anything that was discussed today, we have posted a recording of today's event to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available. You can access this recording with or without a Facebook account at www.facebook.com/legalaidnc. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn presentations, such as on disability, Medicaid, tenant rights, you can do so on our website at legalaidnc.org/clinics. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.
Thank you.